Mornings at Granite Hall International Terminal were always busy, a place of crisp suits, silver suitcases rolling on cold granite floors, and smiles polished by status. In the midst of it all, Dr. Naomi Cross, a woman of color in her early 30s, walked quietly. She didn't attract attention. No logo, no escort. Just her business class ticket and the heavy digital watch on her wrist, a thank you gift from a major airline for helping them prevent a potential accident last year. Naomi just needed a quiet place. Seat 2B, by the window. She opened her laptop, scanning the last few lines of data for tomorrow's presentation, a presentation that could change the entire world's aviation safety standards. But only a few minutes later, a cold voice rang out behind her. "Excuse me, this seat is reserved for VIP passengers." The woman who was called VIP smiled, adjusting the camera lens. She was an influencer with millions of followers. Naomi was asked to leave amid curious eyes and secretly recording phones. Little did anyone know that, minutes later, the woman who was kicked out of that VIP seat would cause the entire flight to make an emergency landing and the entire aviation world to bow its head. If you believe that justice is not about noise, please like, share this video, and subscribe to my channel to join me in the story where the silence of a woman of color saved 188 lives. Let's begin. Granite Hall shimmered like a temple of motion glass, steel, and light moving in synchronized rhythm. Announcements echoed from the ceiling, the voice of some unseen woman repeating departures in tones that were neither warm nor cold, simply inevitable. People hurried, dragged, bumped, and queued. Every footstep seemed to belong to someone important. Every minute, another flight lifted a fragment of the world into the sky. Near Gate 22, Dr. Naomi Cross moved quietly through the crowd. 34, composed, and precise. She had the look of someone whose mind was elsewhere but in control of everything within reach. Her posture was upright without effort, her pace measured, the kind that draws no attention yet commands space around it. She wore a clean navy jacket, a white blouse tucked neatly into tailored slacks. On her wrist, a titanium chronograph with a complicated dial. The kind of watch engineers love because it doesn't just tell time, it measures truth. She carried no entourage, no luxury brand bag screaming status, just a slim laptop case, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, and the calm of someone who doesn't need to be seen to know her value. The board above flickered. SkyLynx Airways, Flight 904 to Kingsport International, connecting to Capitol View. Her destination was not leisure, but duty. In less than 20 hours, she would stand before the Global Aviation Safety Consortium to present Sentinel Diagnostic Suite, her team's latest predictive system capable of identifying hydraulic drive failures hours before they occur. If accepted, Sentinel would become the standard across the industry, preventing the kind of accidents that turn headlines into memorials. But to finish her final review of telemetry data, she needed one thing: silence. That was why she'd booked Seat 2B, business class, window side, not for the champagne, for the quiet hum of controlled air pressure, the rhythm that helps thoughts align. When the boarding call came, she entered among the first, not by privilege, but by protocol. Engineers are creatures of order. She greeted the flight attendants with a polite nod, found her seat, stowed her case beneath the chair, and opened her laptop. A single line of code glowed on the screen. Naomi adjusted her glasses and typed. Outside the window, the wing of the Falcon. 780 glistened under the morning sun. She liked this aircraft. Reliable, efficient, a machine that responded to respect. Then came the perfume suite, invasive, followed by laughter that carried the tone of entitlement. Naomi looked up. A blonde woman in oversized sunglasses was posing with her phone toward the cabin door, narrating into the camera. "Hey guys, boarding. SkyLynx 904 business class. Baby, we're flying VIP today." Behind her, the chief flight attendant, Cassandra Blake, hovered with a smile so professional it almost masked impatience. The woman with the phone turned, her manicured hand waving casually toward Naomi's seat. Sorry. I think this is my spot 2B. Right. Naomi glanced at her ticket, then back at the attendant. Calm. Controlled. I believe you're mistaken. 2B is mine. Cassandra leaned in, checking Naomi's boarding pass, a slow, performative inspection. Her smile thinned. Miss Vale here is one of our VIP passengers. There may have been a mix-up in the system. Would you mind relocating to 4D? It's still business class. Naomi's eyes flicked once between them. The influencer, Madison Vale. She remembered the name from somewhere, was already adjusting her hair for another shot. I'm sorry, Naomi said evenly. My work requires a window seat. My boarding pass is confirmed. I'll stay where I am. For a moment. Silence hovered, not the respectful kind, but the kind that tests how far dignity can bend before it breaks. Cassandra's posture stiffened, her tone softened only in words, not intention. Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security. A few passengers glanced up, half interested, half embarrassed for being witnesses. Naomi felt every gaze like a quiet trial. Somewhere inside, a small voice whispered, Don't react. Not yet. Let them reveal themselves first. Before she could respond, an older gentleman in seat 3A, silver hair, reading glasses, the calm dignity of academia, stood up. If it helps, he said gently, I can switch with her. I don't mind the middle seat. Naomi hesitated. Pride urged her to refuse, but reason whispered otherwise. The quickest way to silence conflict is sometimes to step aside and let the noise exhaust itself. Thank you, she said softly. She gathered her things and moved to 4D. Madison flopped into 2B, adjusting her camera toward the window. Perfect lighting, she murmured. This is totally worth it. No one applauded, but Cassandra smiled the kind of smile people give when they believe order has been restored. Naomi sat back, opened her laptop again. Her hands were steady, but something cold pooled beneath her ribs. They didn't see me. They saw a black woman in the wrong seat. The engines outside hummed to life. Through the cabin's muted light, Naomi could see the silver wing flex slightly. Her ears caught a faint, high-frequency whine, not uncommon during taxi. But this one had a rhythm, a metallic pulse. Then, a dull thud. She froze. The sound came from the right wing, near where Site 2B faced the actuator housing. Her mind began processing pattern recognition, instinct built from a decade of listening to machines breathe. She leaned slightly, peering past the aisle toward the window she no longer owned. Madison's reflection smiled back at her phone. But Naomi's eyes weren't on her. They were tracing the faint shimmer of fluid seeping along a panel line. That's not condensation, she thought. That's hydraulic. She pressed the service button. Cassandra approached, expression preloaded with irritation. Yes, I believe there's a hydraulic leak on the right wing, Naomi said quietly. You need to alert the captain to check System B pressure. Cassandra blinked, her voice dropping half a tone. Ma'am, please don't cause panic. Everything's fine. It isn't, Naomi said. If I'm right, the actuator on slat 3 is overpressurizing. Cassandra's lips tightened. I'm going to have to ask you to sit down and stop making unfounded technical claims. Naomi met her gaze, calm as before. If I push harder now, she'll make me the problem. So she sat back, hands folded on her lap, and waited. The aircraft turned toward the runway. Engines surged. The vibration deepened familiar, yet wrong in a way only trained intuition could hear. She closed her eyes. Stay calm. Watch. Listen. Outside. Sunlight flashed on aluminum. Inside, privilege settled comfortably into the seat that was once hers, and far beneath, hidden under polished flooring and corporate silence, a slat actuator began to fail. Cassandra Blake had worked for SkyLynx Airways long enough to believe she could tell who belonged in business class before even checking a boarding pass. Years and polished heels had taught her the unspoken hierarchy of travel posture. Clothing, the kind of luggage someone carried. She didn't need to ask. She could see it. And right now, the woman in 2B didn't fit the image. Dr. Naomi Cross sat quietly, laptop open, running through telemetry data one line at a time. She wasn't wearing designer perfume, no glossy handbag perched beside her, no phone aimed at herself, just concentration, just work. From the corner of the cabin, Cassandra watched her, waiting for something she couldn't name, maybe a mistake, maybe a sign. When Madison Vale boarded, the shift in the air was immediate. Flashbulbs of attention followed her, a ripple of recognition running through the passengers. Hi, guys, Madison said to her camera, panning across the cabin. We're finally boarding 904 to Kingsport. Business class. SkyLynx treats me so well. She smiled, flipping her long hair with practiced grace. Cassandra fell into step beside her. Right this way. Miss Vale. 2B. Madison's smile widened when she saw the seat. Perfect, she said until her eyes landed on Naomi. Wait, someone's in my spot. Cassandra leaned forward, her polite voice edged with command. Excuse me, ma'am. This seat is reserved for our VIP passenger. Naomi looked up, the light from her laptop washing a faint glow over her face. I'm sorry. For Miss Vale, Cassandra clarified, smiling as if the issue were already solved. It seems there's been an assignment mix-up. Naomi reached for her boarding pass and held it out. Steady and clear. Seat 2B, confirmed. She scanned it under the seat monitor's barcode reader. It beeped green confirmed passenger. Dr. Naomi Cross. It appears I'm exactly where I should be. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Cassandra's smile stayed, but the warmth behind it evaporated. Sometimes our system takes a moment to update. Miss Vale has VIP priority. Madison, still holding her camera, let out a short laugh. It's fine. Really. I just need the window for my unboxing shot. I'll only film the first few minutes. She can have it after takeoff. Naomi blinked once. The cabin around her seemed to narrow the weight of eyes she didn't invite pressing down. She closed her laptop gently, not snapping, not sighing. I'm afraid that's not possible. I specifically requested this seat to work during the flight. Cassandra's voice dropped half a note. Ma'am, I'm asking politely. It'll make things easier for everyone. Easier for whom Naomi asked softly. The question hung in the air, still and sharp. Madison looked briefly annoyed, lowering her phone. Oh, come on. It's just a seat. Don't make this a thing. Cassandra inhaled through her nose, maintaining her smile with visible effort. Ma'am, please cooperate, or I'll have to involve airport security. There it was, the word that ended most arguments. Security. Naomi could feel something rise in her chest. Not anger exactly, but heat. The kind that comes when you realize the script has already been written for you. She could see it on Cassandra's face, the subtle shift from courtesy to control. She knew that look. Everyone black in a suit had seen it at least once in their life. Inside, I thought. You can take my seat, but not my calm. Before she could answer, a voice from the next row spoke, soft but firm. I'll switch with her, said the man in 3A, Edmund Clark. He looked old enough to have taught history before history started moving too fast. Please, let her have my seat. It's not worth the noise. Naomi turned to him, eyes meeting his with quiet gratitude. You don't have to. I know, he said. That's why I want to. Cassandra exhaled, relieved. Thank you, sir. That's very considerate. Madison smiled into her camera again. See, everyone's so kind here. Naomi gathered her things without another word. She didn't rush. She didn't look defeated. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. Laptop closed, cable coiled, bag lifted. She stepped out into the aisle, brushed past Cassandra, and slid into 4D without a sound. As she sat down, a young flight attendant, Leo Park, new to the job, by the way. His uniform still held its factory creases, caught her eye. His look was brief but apologetic, the look of someone who saw the wrong thing happen and wasn't high enough to stop it. Madison plopped into 2B, phone aimed out the window. Look at that light. Perfect for the intro. Flying to Kingsport in style, she whispered into her camera. Can you hand me a mimosa? Thanks, babe. Cassandra laughed softly, crouching beside her, pretending not to notice Naomi watching. Of course, Miss Vale. Anything else before takeoff, Naomi returned her focus to her laptop, but the data on the screen blurred. The noise of the cabin faded behind the low, rhythmic pulse of engines powering up outside. She wasn't angry, not exactly. What she felt was colder, cleaner, the kind of silence that comes right before a decision. She looked up once more. Cassandra stood by 2B, pouring a drink, her smile flawless. Madison's laughter filled the air like perfume light, invasive, impossible to ignore. Naomi thought, if dignity were visible, would they still pretend not to see it? The boarding door closed, the intercom crackled, the captain's voice came through, calm and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard SkyLynx Flight 904 to Kingsport International. Estimated flight time 1 hour, 26 minutes. Naomi stared out across the cabin toward the window she no longer had. Beyond that glass, the right wing glinted under the rising sun. For a brief second, she noticed something unusual, a faint shimmer along the slat panel, a trace line too dark to be condensation. She frowned, instincts aligning like gears clicking into place. Hydraulic fluid. She pressed the service button. Cassandra glanced at her, but didn't move. Naomi tried again, the light above her seat glowing amber. Cassandra turned away. The hum in the floor deepened as the aircraft began to taxi. Naomi closed her eyes and listened not to the people, but to the machine itself. Each vibration, each pitch in the engine's voice told a story. Engineers learn to hear what others can't. She caught it again, a high-pitched rattle layered under the engine's whine. Subtle, precise, the kind of sound that doesn't belong. She unbuckled slightly, leaning just enough to look between the seats ahead. Madison was still filming, oblivious, her reflection framed by the very window Naomi had chosen for its view of the slat mechanisms. Naomi breathed slowly. If I say something now, she'll roll her eyes. Cassandra will dismiss me again. She sat back, expression unreadable. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, then paused. She opened a new document, typing 3 words. Possible actuator fault. The cursor blinked below it. Patient, waiting for the world to catch up. In seat 2B. Madison laughed again, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Cassandra joined her, their voices floating above the hum. Naomi watched them without resentment, only with the quiet certainty of someone who knew how fragile safety really was, how fast arrogance could turn into apology. She leaned her head against the seat and thought, let them have their moment. The truth always waits its turn. Outside, the engines roared. The plane turned toward the runway, and the woman they'd dismissed, the one asked to move for a VIP, was already listening to the first whisper of what would soon shut down the entire flight. The air inside the cabin changed before a word was spoken. It was the kind of stillness that happens when everyone knows a confrontation is coming, and no one wants to be the one caught watching it too closely. Cassandra Blake straightened her uniform jacket, the SkyLynx badge glinting under the cabin light. Her smile was corporate perfect, but her tone had cooled into something more precise. Dr. Cross, I'll ask one last time. Please vacate this seat. If you refuse, I will have to contact airport security. Passengers nearby looked up from their phones. Some feigned indifference. Others studied the safety card as if reading would make them invisible. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space between sentences. Naomi Cross didn't raise her voice. She never did. Her tone remained steady, almost disarmingly so. You've already scanned my boarding pass. The system confirmed seat 2B. There's no error. Cassandra's reply was practiced. Miss Vale is a SkyLynx VIP. She has media privileges with the company. We ask for your cooperation. Naomi looked at her without blinking. And if I were the one with 2 million followers, would you ask her to move instead? For the first time, Cassandra's expression faltered not out of guilt, but discomfort. She straightened again. That's not relevant. Please, don't make this difficult. Madison Vale, still recording, turned her phone slightly toward Naomi. Her tone was honeyed with mock sympathy. Look, I totally get it. Okay, but this is just how these things work. Sometimes they need the seat for PR. You understand. Naomi's eyes flicked toward the phone lens, then back to Madison. She could see her own reflection in the dark glass calm, expressionless, framed by the face of someone who believed herself untouchable. If I react, Naomi thought, I become the story they want, the angry black woman. If I stay silent, I lose more than a seat. Cassandra folded her arms, authority replacing patience. Ma'am, this is your final warning. The tension in the cabin thickened. Invisible, but heavy. The man in 3A, Edmund Clark, cleared his throat. His voice carried the weight of someone used to quiet rooms and reasoned debates. Excuse me, ladies, he said, standing with a small effort. If it will resolve this, I'll trade with her. I don't mind. Cassandra turned to him with instant relief. That's very kind of you, sir. Naomi's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have to, he interrupted softly. Some fights aren't worth having in public. Let it go this time. It wasn't condescension. It was compassion, spoken in the tired tone of someone who had lived long enough to know the cost of pride in unfair places. Naomi closed her laptop, slid it into her bag, and rose, each movement deliberate, each breath measured. When she stood, she realized how small the space between them felt. Cassandra's body angled toward her, Madison's phone hovering like a silent witness. She stepped aside without a word. Thank you, Cassandra said, the word landing with the faintest echo of victory. As Naomi moved down the aisle toward 4D, she caught fragments of whispers. Overreacting. Someone murmured, "She should have just switched." Another voice replied, "You never know with these people." She didn't turn. She didn't let it touch her face. But inside, the words sank deep, lodging like stones in still water. At 4D, she slid into the middle seat between two strangers, one reading a magazine, the other asleep against the window. Her world had shrunk to a rectangle of space barely wide enough for her elbows. The seatbelt clicked. From where she sat, she could see Madison taking selfies in 2B, Cassandra fussing over her with professional warmth. A mimosa appeared. Laughter followed. Naomi pulled out her laptop again, opened the diagnostic logs. The screen filled with code, graphs, telemetry patterns, familiar, safe, the rhythm of logic against chaos. Yet her focus drifted. The hum of the cabin wasn't quite steady. The pitch fluctuated subtle, mechanical, out of place. She closed her eyes. Don't get distracted. Focus. But the humiliation lingered. Not because of the seat, not even the stairs. It was the way the system people, policies, politeness could fold itself neatly around someone like Madison while quietly crushing anyone who didn't fit the picture. I remember thinking, this isn't about a chair. It's about permission, who gets it and who's expected to ask for it. Edmund Clark glanced back and their eyes met. He gave a faint nod, a small gesture of apology for a world that never seems to learn. The plane's door closed. The safety demonstration began. Cassandra's voice flowed through the speakers, clear and commanding again, her confidence fully restored. In the event of an emergency, lights will guide you to the nearest exit. Naomi tuned her out. Her eyes drifted to the window beside Madison, the one she had chosen originally. The wing reflected in the sunlight. Smooth and silver, almost perfect. But engineers don't trust perfect. The engine started their low growl. The plane began to taxi. Madison giggled, turning to Cassandra. I'm getting amazing footage already. This airline knows how to treat its people right. Cassandra smiled. We always take care of our VIPs. The word VIP landed like static in Naomi's ear, meaningless letters now, worn from overuse. She typed something in her notes, a kind of reflex when emotion needed structure. Observation systems fail not because of bad parts, but bad priorities. She stared at the line until it blurred. The laptop screen reflected her face composed, silent, unflinching. The vibration under her feet deepened as the aircraft turned onto the runway. There was a brief pause, that quiet before acceleration and then the push. The engines roared, pressing everyone into their seats. Naomi gripped the armrest lightly, feeling the vibration travel up through her bones. It was in that moment she heard it again, the same faint rattle from earlier. A metallic hum, uneven, localized near the right wing. Most people would never notice it, lost under the sound of thrust and lift. But Naomi heard it as clearly as a whisper. Something was off. Her fingers hovered over the call button. She hesitated. Cassandra's earlier threat still echoed in her mind. I'll have to contact security. She looked at the light above her head. It glowed amber when pressed. She imagined Cassandra's reaction, the sigh, the dismissive tone. She pictured Madison's smirk caught half on camera. So instead, Naomi reached into her bag, retrieved her notebook, and wrote by hand. Right wing unusual harmonic. Possible actuator instability. Her handwriting was small, precise. The kind of script engineers use when they expect someone to read it later in a report. As the plane climbed through the clouds, she tucked the note beside her laptop, looked out the narrow sliver of glass beside her, and exhaled. Madison was laughing again. Cassandra was serving drinks. The world, for now, was balanced in its usual crooked way. But Naomi knew balance was an illusion. Machines break when ignored. People do too. She folded her hands on her lap and whispered barely audible, more to herself than to anyone. Let them have their moment. I'll wait for mine. Outside, the sky opened wide, unknowing, and the hum beneath her seat continued faint, rhythmic, wrong. The Falcon 780 taxied along the wet runway, its wheels rolling over shallow puddles that mirrored the early sunlight. Inside, the cabin had settled into the soft rhythm of pre-takeoff murmurs, seatbelt clicks, the faint clinking of glasses in the galley. The tension that had filled the aisle minutes ago seemed to have dissolved into polite silence. To everyone else, it was just another flight. To Naomi Cross, it wasn't. She sat in 4D, body still, senses sharpened. Her attention drifted toward the sound of the engines, the way the turbine's pitch rose and fell like a pulse. For most people, that sound meant safety, routine. To her, it was language. Machines spoke. They told their stories to those who listened closely enough. As the aircraft turned to align with the runway, she heard it again, a thin, high-pitched hiss coming from the right wing, the side she could see faintly from her seat if she leaned just slightly. Then, beneath that, a short, blunt thud, the kind of sound that didn't belong. Her head tilted just a fraction. It was subtle, easily mistaken for ordinary noise. But Naomi had spent 10 years in test bays listening to hydraulic systems breathe. She knew what normal sounded like, and this wasn't it. That's a slat actuator. Outer segment. Position 3. It's binding under load. She reached for her notebook, the same one where she had written her earlier observation. The hum of the engines deepened. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as power shifted to the main systems. The aircraft's nose lifted, pressing passengers back into their seats. Naomi's pen moved quickly. Audible cavitation right wing. Slat Narber 3 actuator, likely exceeding tolerance. Check System B pressure anomaly. She looked toward the aisle. Cassandra Blake was performing her final walkthrough, that brisk pre-takeoff stride every senior attendant carried like armor. Naomi pressed the call button. The amber light above her head blinked once. Cassandra's steps slowed. She saw the light, paused, and then, without breaking stride, turned away. Naomi waited a few seconds, pressed again. Still nothing. She's ignoring me. The aircraft began its takeoff roll. The vibration changed. Power roared through the cabin. Naomi braced, not from fear, but from analysis. Her mind tracked each sound, the low hum of hydraulics pressurizing, the micro shifts of airflow as the flaps extended, the faint vibration underfoot as the slats deployed. There it was again, that hiss, followed by a deeper shudder from the right side. She could almost visualize the mechanism in her head, the actuator piston extending unevenly, hydraulic fluid cavitating, the seals scraping under stress. She knew the numbers pressures, torque limits, redundancy factors. But she also knew that physics didn't negotiate with arrogance. The plane lifted off. The roar softened to a steady hum. Cassandra's voice came over the intercom, cheerful and smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our initial climb. Please remain seated until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." Naomi exhaled slowly. Her fingers drummed against her knee, not from nerves but calculation. If it's an actuator stall, they'll lose slat symmetry. The plane could yaw or roll on approach. She looked down the aisle again. Cassandra was already serving drinks in the front rows, smiling for Madison Vale's camera. Naomi stood halfway, signaling discreetly to the younger attendant Leo Park, who had been watching from the galley. When he approached, his expression was cautious, almost apologetic. "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell your captain," Naomi said quietly, "to check the ECAM readouts for hydraulic pressure on System B, especially actuator channel 4112 on the right wing?" Leo blinked. "Sorry. Could you repeat that?" Tell him, Doctor. Naomi Cross from Etheron Dynamics believes there's a hydraulic imbalance. He'll understand what that means. Leo hesitated, glancing toward Cassandra. She was busy chatting with Madison, laughing too loudly for the quiet cabin. Naomi lowered her voice. It's important. Please. Leo nodded once. I'll try. But when he turned, Cassandra intercepted him. Naomi couldn't hear the words, only saw the exchange, Leo speaking softly. Cassandra's polite smile freezing midair, her head shaking once, sharp and final. Leo returned a moment later, empty-handed. She said the cockpit is busy during climb. She'll pass it along later. Naomi's lips parted, but she stopped herself. Later, in aviation, later was the most dangerous word. She sank back into her seat, jaw set. Through the gap between the rows, she could see the faint shimmer of fluid streaking along the panel line near the wing root. Under the sunlight, it caught a dull red hue. Not fuel. Hydraulic oil, Skydroll. It's leaking. Her pulse stayed steady. Fear had no place here. Fear makes people loud. Precision makes people listen. She opened her phone's engineering app, one connected to Etheron's diagnostic portal, and began a silent log. She typed each observation with exact language, time-stamped to the second. Takeoff phase. Unusual harmonic at 2B window sector. Audible cavitation persists. Recommend immediate inspection upon landing. She attached a photo, discreetly angled through the narrow aisle, the faint oily pattern on the wing, the micro-vibration of the panel. Cassandra passed by again, offering drinks. Naomi closed her phone, resting it on her lap. Would you like anything? Cassandra asked, smiling with the serenity of someone confident the world was in order. No. Thank you, Naomi said. But I do need to speak to the captain. Cassandra's eyes narrowed just slightly, the professional veneer straining. About what? About a possible mechanical issue. Right wing. I heard a noise consistent with actuator strain. Cassandra's laugh was quick, dismissive. I assure you, ma'am, everything is fine. We'd know if something was wrong. Naomi looked at her calmly. Unless the system hasn't reported it yet, actuator faults sometimes develop silently. Ma'am, please sit down. You're alarming other passengers. No one around them was even looking. But Naomi understood the pattern authority disguising fear with control. She leaned back, her voice barely above a whisper. When a system fails, it doesn't care who's VIP. Cassandra frowned. Excuse me. Naomi didn't answer. She simply turned her gaze toward the window, watching the sunlight flash across the trembling wing. The flight continued. Drinks poured. Cameras flashed. Madison laughed again, filming her breakfast tray. To everyone else, it was just a flight. But Naomi kept listening every hiss, every hum, every tremor. Her mind measured the rhythm of mechanical life against the rhythm of human arrogance. They don't hear it, she thought. They never do. Until it's too late. Outside, 30,000 feet above the ground, a hydraulic line continued to bleed quietly into the wind. And in seat 4D, the woman they'd asked to move was the only one who knew it. The Falcon 780 climbed through soft layers of morning cloud, its engines steady, its passengers lulled into quiet complacency. The cabin was a portrait of calm coffee being poured, a page of the Wall Street Journal turning, the faint buzz of Madison Vale's camera as she whispered into her phone. Only one person heard something wrong. Naomi Cross sat upright in 4D, her body angled slightly, head tilted toward the right wing. The pitch was wrong again. Beneath the roar of the engines, she heard it the same metallic whine. Higher now, thinner, struggling against pressure. Then another sound, a muffled thud, faint but deliberate, like a heartbeat skipping once, the kind of sound that doesn't repeat unless something is failing. Her hand closed around her pen before her thoughts even caught up. That's slat actuator number 3, outer section. It's binding again. She wrote the words quickly across the corner of her notebook, her letters small and surgical. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Cassandra Blake's voice followed, warm and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, you are now free to move about the cabin. We'll begin our in-flight service shortly. Naomi stood immediately. She wasn't dramatic. She simply rose with quiet urgency, holding her notebook close. Cassandra, standing near the galley, noticed her approach and sighed, already bracing herself. Dr. Cross, Cassandra began, that false smile resurfacing. Please, remain seated. The captain will I need you to contact the flight deck, Naomi interrupted, her voice even, low but firm. Tell them to check the ECAM display for hydraulic pressure system B specifically. There's a possible leak on the right wing. If it continues, the slats could go asymmetric. Cassandra blinked. For a moment, she didn't move. The words sounded technical, foreign, too calm to be taken seriously. Ma'am, she said slowly, you need to sit down. You're not authorized to assess aircraft systems. Naomi kept her gaze steady. I'm not guessing. I designed them. Etheron Dynamics. The Falcon 780's hydraulic model is mine. I know the sound of that actuator when it's failing. A murmur rippled through the nearby rows. A few heads turned. Madison Vale lifted her phone instinctively, half smiling. Is everything okay? She called out, already angling for footage. Cassandra straightened, the tone of control sharpening. Please, Miss Vale, everything's fine. Then to Naomi, quieter but colder. You're causing unnecessary concern. Sit down. Naomi took a slow breath. I'm trying to prevent a chain reaction that could compromise your approach configuration. You need to tell the captain now. Cassandra's expression hardened, the polite mask cracking. Ma'am, if you continue this behavior, I'll have to consider it a disturbance. The word hung in the air like a threat wrapped in civility. Disturbance. Naomi had heard it before different places. Same meaning. The polite label for you don't belong here. Leo Park, the young attendant, hovered nearby, visibly uncomfortable. He met Naomi's eyes, silently pleading with her to step back, to protect herself. She understood that look too, the one people give when they see wrong, but don't have the rank to make it right. Cassandra folded her arms. Dr. Cross, if you don't return to your seat, I'll be forced to call the captain and request security meet us on landing. Or sooner, if necessary. Naomi paused. She could feel the weight of every passenger's gaze, the curiosity, the quiet judgment. She could hear Madison's phone camera humming softly, capturing the moment for clicks, not context. Inside, something in her steadied. Anger won't help. Precision will. Then call them, she said. Because if you don't, you might not land with all your slats deployed. That's not a theory. That's a fact. The smile faded completely from Cassandra's face. She glanced at Leo, gesturing sharply for him to stay back. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Sit down. Naomi exhaled once. She knew this argument was lost not on logic, but on ego. And ego, she thought, was the most expensive failure mode in any system. She turned without another word and walked back to her seat. Her steps were measured, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Around her, Whispers followed, each one a small judgment pretending to be curiosity. She's overreacting. Probably nervous. I heard her say she's an engineer. Sure she is. Naomi sat, buckled in, and opened her laptop again. Her reflection appeared in the black screen before it lit up calm eyes. Unreadable expression. I warned them, she thought. Now physics decides. The plane leveled at cruising altitude. The clouds thinned. Madison laughed again in Tubu, her camera now filming the meal tray as Cassandra poured her another drink. The world had reset itself comfortably blind. Naomi opened a secure diagnostics app through a back door she'd built for engineers during system trials. She shouldn't have had access from passenger Wi-Fi, but redundancy had its uses. The data feed was faint, patchy, but there it was. System B pressure fluctuation detected. Actuator 4412 anomaly. Stress beyond tolerance. Her stomach sank. It wasn't catastrophic yet. But if the actuator failed completely during descent, the slat would retract unevenly. That meant asymmetric lift, potential roll, and loss of control at low altitude. She typed in a timestamped note to herself, warning issued, ignored, recorded for incident review. Cassandra walked past again, glancing down just long enough to see the lines of code on Naomi's screen. Ma'am, she said curtly, personal devices are to remain in flight mode. Please refrain from whatever that is. Naomi closed the laptop gently. Understood. Her tone was polite, but her eyes were distant. Inside, she felt the weight of calm settle over her like armor. There was no point in shouting. People like Cassandra didn't listen to volume. They listened to consequence, I thought. Sometimes justice begins as a warning no one wants to hear. The engines maintained their steady rhythm, masking the irregular pulse Naomi couldn't unhear. She stared at the back of Madison's seat, where the phone camera's red light still blinked, capturing smiles and mimosas, while the wing outside trembled under pressure. She leaned her head against the seat. The hum of the hydraulics pulsed faintly beneath the floor. It's still holding, she told herself. For now. Outside, the sky stretched endless and clean. Inside, every sound seemed to grow sharper, every vibration more precise. The danger was real, invisible, and ignored like so many warnings before it. The flight continued smoothly for everyone except the one person who knew it shouldn't. The seatbelt sign had gone dark. Service began with the familiar rhythm of polite gestures, the clink of trays, the whisper of fabric as attendants leaned into aisles. The aircraft leveled at 35,000 feet, steady above the clouds. The passengers around Naomi returned to comfort, unaware that the air beneath their calm was trembling. Naomi Cross pressed the call button again. The small amber light above her seat blinked faithfully. Patient, it blinked once, twice, then a third time. Cassandra Blake passed the aisle twice each time, glancing at the light, then turning her head deliberately away. The performance was subtle but intentional, the kind of silence that says, I see you, and I choose not to answer. Naomi waited a full minute, then another. When the light finally dimmed automatically, she didn't press it again. Instead, she closed her laptop, folded her hands, and thought, if they won't carry the message, I'll find another way. The young attendant, Leo Park, approached a few minutes later, quietly offering drinks to passengers in her row. His eyes flicked toward her for half a second, a silent apology for things he couldn't change. She caught the glance. Leo, she said softly, I need you to do something important. He leaned slightly closer, cautious. Yes, ma'am. Tell the captain, Naomi said, her tone clinical, To run an ECAM diagnostic on hydraulic system B, there's a pressure drop likely in the actuator assembly for the outboard slat. Right side. Leo hesitated. I'm sorry. I don't just say this, she said, keeping her voice low. Hydraulic pressure fluctuation. System B. Outboard actuator 4412. He'll know. He nodded, uncertain but respectful. There was something in her tone, a gravity too precise to dismiss. I'll take care of it. As he turned, Cassandra appeared at the far end of the cabin, her steps measured, smile practiced. Naomi watched Leo approach her, speaking quickly, his gestures small, careful. Cassandra listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she placed a hand on his arm, leaned close, and whispered something that froze him in place. He nodded once, subdued, and walked back toward the galley. Naomi didn't need to hear the words. She'd seen that exchange before in boardrooms, at conferences, in every place where authority feared competence from the wrong face. She could almost hear Cassandra's voice even from a distance. Let's not alarm the cockpit over nothing. A few minutes later, Leo passed her again, unable to meet her eyes. The silence between them said enough. Naomi exhaled quietly and looked toward the front of the cabin. Madison Vale was still filming, her voice bright and hollow. Guys, look at this. It's like floating on silk, she said into her phone, panning across the cabin window that once belonged to Naomi. Best view ever. Naomi's gaze lingered on that window, on the slice of metal beyond it, the right wing, gleaming under filtered light. From her angle, she could see the edge of the slat panel just below the fuselage line. And then she saw it, a faint shimmer. At first, it looked like sunlight catching metal, but the movement was wrong. It glistened even when the plane banked away from the sun. It moved like something alive, hydraulic fluid. Her pulse slowed, her breath even. The pattern was thin but continuous, tracing a diagonal line near the actuator cover. She leaned slightly, steadying her gaze. The wing trembled small, barely perceptible vibrations passing through the metal like ripples through water. The kind of micro-vibration you only get when pressure is uneven, when fluid isn't distributing force correctly. It's still leaking. Pressure imbalance confirmed. She reached for her phone, switched it to camera mode, and zoomed in carefully between the seats. The image focused a faint purple streak, catching light under the wing's smooth surface. She captured 3 photos, steady, close, irrefutable, evidence. From behind her, Cassandra's voice arrived again, lighter than the tension deserved. Dr. Cross, please stay seated. Filming out the window isn't permitted during flight. Naomi turned slowly, lowering the phone. I'm documenting a potential hazard, not sightseeing. Cassandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. You've been asked multiple times to relax. The aircraft is functioning normally. Is it, Naomi asked? Because I just watched fluid trailing from your right wing. Cassandra's jaw tensed, but her tone remained composed. If there were any issues, the cockpit would know. Naomi's reply was quiet, deliberate. Not if the indicator lag hasn't triggered. That actuator could be failing in isolation. Several passengers were now half listening. Cassandra noticed, her tone turning sharp. Ma'am, please stop creating unnecessary drama. Naomi stared at her for a moment, expression unchanging. This isn't drama. It's physics. Cassandra's face hardened. If you continue to disturb passengers, I'll have to restrain you until landing. The words fell into the air like a verdict. Naomi looked past her, toward the window again, and spoke softly, less to Cassandra, more to herself. They always threaten what they don't understand. Cassandra turned and walked away. The sound of her heels clicking down the aisle felt almost rehearsed, each step a punctuation mark in a conversation that had never truly been two-sided. Naomi took another photo, then another. Her hands didn't tremble. Engineers learn early that precision is the last defense against chaos. She opened her notes again and began logging. Observation confirmed visible hydraulic leakage at right slat actuator. Vibration increasing. Recommend immediate communication with cockpit. As she typed, she thought about the absurdity of it, how calm everything appeared. People sipping wine, adjusting their seats, watching a movie where nothing real ever breaks. The illusion of control, wrapped neatly in white linen and branded napkins. Leo passed by again, slower this time. He whispered, almost without moving his lips, "I'm sorry." She said the captain doesn't want any messages unless it's an emergency. Naomi looked up at him. "Then tell her this is one." He hesitated. She can't stop the truth," Naomi said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was a statement of fact. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before retreating down the aisle again. Naomi turned back to the window, eyes narrowing on the slat housing. The shimmer was growing. The leak was real, accelerating. She took a final photo and saved it under a single-word evidence. "I thought, the system's breaking down. Not just the machine, but the people who are supposed to keep it safe." She sat back, folded her hands, and waited not with fear, but with a strange, quiet certainty. The hum of the plane surrounded her, steady but fragile, like a song that didn't know it was ending. Outside, the sky was blindingly clear. Inside, denial filled the air thicker than the smell of coffee and perfume. No one else heard the warning yet, but it was already singing. The hum of the engines had become a steady, indifferent background, an orchestra of metal and motion that no longer seemed to care what happened inside its cabin. At 35,000 feet, humanity always shrank into patterns. The powerful took comfort in the illusion of control, and those who questioned it were labeled as disturbances. Naomi Cross held her phone firmly in both hands. The photo she had taken was too clear to be denied. The glimmering trail of hydraulic fluid on the right wing, visible through the window, was unmistakable. It wasn't theory or paranoia. It was physics captured in pixels. She waited until Cassandra Blake passed again, balancing a tray of half-empty glasses and the weight of her own composure. Naomi rose slightly, her tone even but urgent. "Ms. Blake, please look at this. It's not speculation anymore. You need to see it." Cassandra glanced down at the screen, the faintest frown touching her forehead. "What am I looking at? The right wing," Naomi said. "Hydraulic leakage system. B. You can see the reflection here. This isn't condensation. It's skydraw fluid. It's under pressure. It's leaking." Cassandra's voice softened to something dangerously polite. "And how exactly would you know that, Dr. Cross?" "Because," Naomi said quietly, "I designed it." For a moment, the cabin seemed to pause the way people do when a truth lands heavier than expected. Cassandra's lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes flicked between the photo and Naomi's calm, steady face. It was a small, flickering second of uncertainty. And then, just as quickly, it hardened into denial. "Ma'am, that's enough." Cassandra moved as if to step away, but Naomi extended her hand slightly, not blocking her, only pleading for recognition. "Please," Naomi said, voice low. "I'm not trying to argue. Just have the captain check the ECAM display." Cassandra's hand moved faster than thought. The tray tilted. The glass rattled. The phone slipped from Naomi's grip struck the aisle carpet, and skidded halfway under a seat. For an instant, silence filled the space between them. Then came the sound of small, collective intake of breath from the passengers nearby. The moment everyone realizes something real just happened. Cassandra bent down first, too quickly, scooping up the phone and placing it on the tray beside her. "That's enough, ma'am," she repeated. "Louder this time. You're becoming disruptive." Naomi looked at her, steady. "You just knocked my phone." Cassandra's smile was stretched thin. Accidents happen. It wasn't the words that cut. It was the certainty behind them. The weaponized civility of someone confident the system would always take her side. From the front row, Madison Vale's voice sliced into the tension. "Oh my God. Are you seeing this?" she said to her camera. Her phone already raised. The lens pointed squarely at Naomi. "She's been yelling at the flight attendant like full-on freaking out. I think she even grabbed her. This is insane." Naomi froze. "That's not true." Madison's voice grew louder, feeding on its own performance. "You can't just attack staff on a plane. Like, what is wrong with people? I'm recording this for everyone's safety." Cassandra turned slightly toward Madison, as if to calm her, but made no effort to correct the lie. The older woman, 2 rows back, leaned toward her husband and whispered, "They should restrain her." A man near the aisle muttered something about troublemakers on flights. The story was already rewriting itself in real time, without evidence, without pause. Naomi stood perfectly still, her breathing slow, deliberate. Around her, noise began to swell, anxious murmurs, the hum of fear disguised as judgment. Cassandra lifted her radio handset, her tone clipped, "Captain, we may have a situation developing in business class." Leo Park appeared again, pale and uncertain, caught between duty and conscience. "Ms. Blake, please." She wasn't quiet. Cassandra snapped without turning. Leo's mouth closed. He stepped back, eyes flicking toward Naomi with quiet apology. Naomi spoke softly, more to herself than anyone else. "This is how systems fail. Not from malice, but from belief, the belief that authority is always right." Cassandra faced her again. "Sit down, ma'am, before I'm forced to restrain you." Naomi's gaze was calm. "You're threatening the wrong person." Madison's phone light glowed brighter, her voice dripping with false fear. "She's still talking back. I think she's gone enough," Naomi said, not loud, but firm, a single word sharp enough to slice through the noise. The cabin went still again, caught between 2 opposing energies, hysteria and control. Naomi slowly crouched, retrieved her phone from the floor, and stood. She checked the screen. The photo was intact. The evidence was still there, quiet, undeniable, incorruptible. She looked directly at Cassandra. "You can threaten me. You can call security, but the leak is real. The data won't vanish just because you ignore it." Cassandra's mouth tightened, her jaw working as if chewing words she couldn't say out loud. Madison kept filming, her voice softer now, uncertain. The narrative she'd been constructing no longer fit the tone of the woman standing before her. Leo took one small step forward, his voice quiet. "Ms. Blake," he said, "maybe we should just let the captain see the photo. It wouldn't hurt to." Cassandra shot him a glare. "Return to your station, Mr. Park." He froze again, retreating like a shadow into the galley. The tension broke in whispers. A woman muttered, "She's making a scene." Another man said, "People need to follow instructions." The tide had turned familiar, predictable, safe for everyone but her. Naomi looked around slowly. The faces staring back weren't cruel. They were afraid. afraid to imagine that someone they'd dismissed might be right, afraid to face what fairness would require if she was. She sat back down, folded her phone in her lap, and said nothing more. Inside, her thoughts were measured, mechanical. Hydraulic fluid loss rate may be 0.2 psi per minute. If they don't divert soon, the actuator might seize before descent. Madison finally lowered her phone, uneasy. Her voice trembled with an artificial calm. Anyway, guys, everything's under control now. Naomi's eyes drifted back toward the window, the one she'd once been asked to leave for a VIP. The reflection of the wing shimmered faintly again, the same thin glimmer of danger she alone seemed to see. I thought, they don't realize yet, the story isn't about me losing control. It's about them not having any. The plane continued to hum through the clouds, a hollow vessel filled with assumptions. Above the chatter, above the hum, above the false calm, a quiet truth moved unseen, bleeding slowly into the air. And for the first time since takeoff, Naomi allowed herself to feel afraid not for herself, but for the 188 people sitting in that metal shell of certainty. The cabin had quieted again, but it was the kind of quiet that follows tension, not peace. The air smelled faintly of reheated coffee and the ghosts of polite judgment. Madison Vale was now whispering into her phone, narrating her version of events. Cassandra Blake, still performing calm professionalism, walked the aisles with clipped steps, her authority intact but shaken. Naomi Cross sat in 4D, the photo of the leaking actuator glowing faintly on her phone screen. She knew now that waiting wasn't an option. The sound from the right wing, the subtle shiver that only an engineer could distinguish, had deepened into a strained hum. The slat actuator was degrading fast. She calculated in her mind pressure drop rate, altitude, temperature, hydraulic fluid viscosity. Every number led to the same conclusion. They won't listen. I have to act. Naomi reached under her seat, retrieved her laptop, and set it on the tray table. The soft click of the hinge sounded louder than it should have. She plugged in her headset, opened the diagnostic suite she'd helped design years ago. The interface was familiar blue, utilitarian, clean. It was meant for ground engineers, not passengers, but Naomi knew something others didn't. The Falcon 780 carried a satellite-linked backdoor portal, an engineering redundancy she had insisted on when Aetheron Dynamics built the hydraulic system, a fail-safe. She opened the secure field panel, entered her ID. The system rejected it. Civilian network. She tried again, rerouting through the maintenance loop. A thin progress bar crept across the screen. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Outside her window, sunlight glared across the clouds. The wing shimmered faintly in the heat of the engine exhaust. She typed fast, each keystroke deliberate, as though she could hear the clock ticking in pressure, units rather than seconds. Naomi Cross, lead systems engineer, Aetheron Dynamics, access code 128-bit AES, key Sentinel protocol override. A prompt flashed, unauthorized domain. Proceed under diagnostic emergency. She clicked yes. The screen shifted, and for a moment, she saw her own reflection. A woman no one believed, sitting among strangers who didn't know she held the keys to their survival. She adjusted the headset mic, opened the encrypted SATCOM channel, and typed the words she had hoped never to use. Code red hydraulic system ASIV B pressure anomaly. Possible actuator 442 fracture. Right slat outboard. Evidence attached audio resonance. Log plus image leak signature. Immediate risk of asymmetric slat deployment. Recommend emergency diversion. priority UASD and Etheron ops. She attached the photo, compressing it into a single data packet. Her hands didn't shake. Years of discipline held them steady. She hit transmit. A progress wheel turned slowly, the bar inching across. For an instant, the Wi-Fi stuttered, as though the very air resisted what she was about to do. Then, a tone. Transmission complete. The message leapt through orbit, bouncing from SkyLynx satellite link to Etheron's emergency servers, then flagged red by the UASD United Aeronautical Safety Division. Somewhere on the ground, alarms began to sound in a control room. Engineers who once worked under Naomi's guidance would see her name flash across their monitors. They would know she never sent false alarms. She sat back, folding her hands in her lap. To anyone else, she looked like a passenger checking her email. But in that small, quiet act, she had changed the course of a flight. Minutes passed. The hum of the engines continued, smooth but tense, like a held breath. Cassandra walked past again, slowing as she noticed the open laptop. "Ma'am," she began, forcing a thin smile, "I'm going to have to ask you to close that device. We've had enough disruptions." Naomi looked up, calm and deliberate. "The disruption isn't me, Ms. Blake. It's outside that window." Cassandra's smile faltered. "I don't appreciate your tone." "You don't have to," Naomi replied. "You'll be hearing from your captain soon." Cassandra frowned, unsure whether to scoff or panic. Before she could speak, the intercom crackled, a moment of static. Then the voice of Captain Noah Bennett filled the cabin, measured, steady, but with a weight that made heads turn. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've received a priority communication from Etheron Dynamics and UASD Flight Safety Command. As a precaution, we'll be diverting to High Ridge International for an unscheduled inspection." A pause. The sound of passengers murmuring. Confusion building like wind. "There's no immediate danger," the captain continued, "but in the interest of everyone's safety, we'll begin descent shortly. Please follow the instructions of our crew." Cassandra's expression drained of color. Her fingers twitched against her tray, the illusion of control slipping like sand through her hands. Madison Vale lowered her phone slowly, the red recording light still blinking against her cheek. Naomi didn't move. She just exhaled quietly. "They heard me." Cassandra turned toward her, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "What did you do? I told the truth," Naomi said. "It's louder when you send it through the right channel." For a moment, Cassandra stood frozen, the words finding no purchase. Then she turned abruptly and disappeared into the galley. Leo passed soon after, face pale, eyes darting toward Naomi with something like awe. The captain just confirmed. He whispered, "Ops Command overrode his nav. They said the message came from you." Naomi nodded once. Good. The seatbelt sign chimed back on. The plane tilted gently into descent, the engines adjusting pitch. The cabin, once full of quiet superiority, now sat in uneasy silence. Every whisper was measured. Every breath was a question. Madison tried to speak to her phone again, but the words faltered. "Hey, guys. Looks like we're diverting. Not sure what's happening." The flight attendant seemed... She stopped. Her own reflection stared back at her from the screen. Unfiltered, uncertain, for the first time, she turned the camera away. Naomi closed her laptop, tucking it beneath the seat. Her eyes lingered on the window one more time. The wing shimmered faintly, the trail of fluid catching the sunlight like a thread of warning. The plane's nose lowered, the sky shifting from deep blue to the soft haze of descent. She didn't smile. There was no triumph in being right, only relief that the system, at least this once, had worked. Sometimes the only way to make them hear you is to speak through the language they trust: data, not emotion, proof, not protest. The engines roared slightly as the aircraft began its controlled descent. Somewhere below, the runway at High Ridge was being cleared, emergency vehicles rolling quietly into position. Naomi folded her hands again, her voice only a whisper inside her own mind. Now is up to gravity and grace. For a long moment after the captain's voice faded, the cabin hung in stunned silence. The words lingered in the air like smoke diverting to High Ridge International. Nobody spoke. Nobody quite understood what had just happened. The sound of the engines deepened as the aircraft adjusted its course. The shift was smooth, but something in it felt different, decisive, inevitable. The illusion of calm that had wrapped the cabin for the past hour began to unravel thread by thread. Cassandra Blake stood frozen near the galley, her lips parting, but no sound coming out. The practiced authority in her posture slipped for the first time. She looked toward the front of the plane, as if the captain might somehow appear to explain it all. Madison Vale lowered her phone slowly. The red recording light blinked twice before she shut it off. For the first time since boarding, she didn't have an audience to play, to just a cabin full of people who were realizing that the woman they'd dismissed might have been right all along. Naomi Cross didn't move. She sat quietly in 4D, hands folded on her lap, eyes steady on the window. From that angle, she could still see the right wing, the thin silver arc slicing through cloud. It looked peaceful from here, but she knew better. The sound, the pattern, the vibration, it was all too familiar. She had spent years designing these systems, years learning what danger sounded like before it ever appeared on a gauge. The intercom clicked again, a pause, and then Captain Noah Bennett's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain once more. We've received direct confirmation from the Aetheron Dynamics Engineering Division and the UASD Flight Safety Office. One of our monitoring systems may be showing early-stage hydraulic irregularities. We are following standard safety protocol. This diversion is purely precautionary. Please remain seated and calm." The message was perfect calm, professional, carefully worded, but the implications were enormous. For anyone who knew how airline protocol worked, a command override from both UASD and Aetheron meant one thing: someone in this cabin had triggered a verified safety escalation, and Cassandra knew exactly who. She turned slowly, her eyes finding Naomi across the aisle. Her voice, when it came, was low but trembling with disbelief. "You did this," she said. "You went behind." Naomi looked up, expression unchanging. "I did what your captain was supposed to do." For a heartbeat. Cassandra didn't respond. Then her professional facade cracked, the calm authority she had worn like armor slipping away. "You jeopardized a federal flight protocol. Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," Naomi said softly. "I stopped a plane from tearing itself apart at 35,000 feet. The words landed like a quiet gavel in a courtroom. A few passengers nearby glanced between them, their expressions shifting confusion melting into curiosity, curiosity into guilt. From the front row, Edmund Clark, the elderly scholar who had switched seats earlier, spoke up gently. "Ms. Blake," he said, his tone even and kind. "I believe she may have just saved your life, and mine." The silence that followed wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavier, embarrassed, reflective, human. Cassandra blinked, the weight of it pressing down. "I was just following procedure," she said, though even she didn't sound convinced. Naomi nodded once. "So was I." Madison Vale sank back into her seat, her phone limp in her hand. Her audience of millions wouldn't hear this part of the story, the part where truth was quiet, not photogenic. She stared at Naomi for a long moment before whispering, almost to herself, "I didn't know who you were." Naomi gave a small, weary smile. "You didn't have to." Outside, the sky had shifted into late afternoon light. The clouds tinted with gold and shadow. The aircraft began its descent, the sound of flaps adjusting breaking the stillness. The passengers watched Cassandra now not with respect, but with the kind of detached curiosity reserved for someone whose authority had evaporated. Naomi reached for her laptop, shutting it carefully. She had already received a return signal, a confirmation ping, from Etheron Ops marked Code Red Received, Flight 783. Diverted, acknowledged by ground control. The system had done its job. The people had not, I thought. That's always the hardest part when truth has to climb higher than ego to be heard. Leo Park emerged quietly from the galley. His eyes met Naomi's, and for the first time all day, he smiled not broadly, but sincerely, like someone who had just learned something about courage. "The captain wants to see you after landing," he said softly. "They said your name came through the engineering priority channel." Naomi nodded, her voice calm. "Tell him I'll be ready." Cassandra turned away, pressing her palm against the bulkhead as if to steady herself. Madison tried to speak again, her voice small. "I'm sorry," she said, "for earlier." Naomi didn't look at her. "Don't be sorry. Be different." The descent grew steeper now, the engines throttling back. Outside, the lights of High Ridge International glimmered faintly on the horizon, a grid of safety and consequence waiting below. The passengers fastened their seat belts without instruction. Nobody complained. Nobody whispered. The cabin was silent again. But this time the silence wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. Cassandra finally sat down in the jump seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked out across the cabin at Naomi, at Madison, at the faces that had once looked to her for guidance, and realized, perhaps for the first time, that control and wisdom were not the same thing. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in peace. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive as applause. Sometimes it's just the sound of an engine throttling down safely because someone refused to stay quiet. The wheels touched down 20 minutes later. Smooth. Controlled. The kind of landing pilots pride themselves on, except this one wasn't about skill. It was about humility. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, Captain Bennett's voice returned one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to High Ridge International. On behalf of the crew, I want to thank you for your patience, and I'd like to extend a special acknowledgement to one of our passengers, Dr. Naomi Cross of Etheron Dynamics, for her assistance today." The words struck like a quiet revelation. Heads turned, whispers rose, then fell. Cassandra looked down, her face pale, and Madison slowly shut off her phone for good. Naomi simply nodded once, her voice barely audible above the hum of taxiing wheels. "You're welcome." Outside the window, the sun dipped low over the tarmac, casting long, golden reflections across the wing. For the first time since takeoff, it gleamed clean, flawless, and alive. The descent into High Ridge International began under a heavy silence. From 30,000 feet, the world below was still invisible, a quilt of cloud and light stretching endlessly toward the horizon. But inside the cockpit, tension had weight. Every move was deliberate, every breath measured. Captain Noah Bennett's hands rested lightly on the yoke. His voice was calm, clipped, professional. Checklist non-normal hydraulic system, B, low pressure, "Confirmed," said First Officer Martinez, fingers moving over the panel. "Alternate system active. Flaps limited to configuration 1. Copy. We'll go partial. No spoilers. Minimal thrust reverser. She'll roll long, but we'll keep her straight." Bennett glanced at the ECAM readout again. The pressure needle hovered dangerously close to red. The advisory light blinked, stubborn as truth. There was no denying it now Naomi Cross's warning had been right. "In the cabin." Cassandra Blake moved through her safety briefing with the precision of habit, but her voice lacked the old command. She followed protocol line by line, but her eyes, when they strayed toward Naomi, held something different, an uneasy recognition. Not guilt, exactly, but the dawning awareness that she had been standing on the wrong side of reason. Naomi sat quietly, seatbelt fastened, laptop stowed. She didn't look out the window this time. She had seen enough wings to know that what mattered wasn't what the eye could see, but what the numbers had whispered earlier, the slight imbalance in hydraulic pressure that could twist a landing into catastrophe. From her seat, she could sense the rhythm of the descent, the subtle trim corrections, the delayed deployment of slats, the tremor in the engine's tone as drag met resistance. They're compensating manually," she thought. "The system's degraded more than the readout shows." Cassandra's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright and tray tables secured. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." No one spoke. The air was taut with the unspoken understanding that this was no ordinary arrival. Outside, the clouds broke suddenly, revealing the sprawl of high ridge beneath them, runways stretching like ribbons of light. Emergency vehicles already lined along the perimeter. The red and white strobes flashed against the tarmac like distant lightning. In the cockpit, Bennett called out, "Flaps 1, speed 160, gear down." The sound of the gear deploying shuddered faintly through the fuselage. The plane felt heavier now, slower, the air thick with drag. The hydraulic warning chimed again, a faint metallic chirp that carried all the authority of impending truth. Martinez exhaled. "We're losing symmetry on the right side slat." "I see it," Bennett said. Voice firm. "We'll land clean. Flaps up. Brace for higher approach speed." Naomi felt it too, the acceleration as the aircraft adjusted its descent angle. The hum grew louder. She looked up at the cabin lights flickering faintly, then at Cassandra, who was gripping the jump seat belt with white knuckles. The ground rose quickly now. Through the small window, Naomi caught a glimpse of the runway edge lights flashing by in rapid rhythm. The engines roared. The wheels hit the tarmac hard-a-deep, chest-level thud that rattled the overhead bins. The plane lurched sideways. A gasp rippled through the cabin as passengers grabbed the seats in front of them. For a breathless instant, gravity felt uncertain. Then Bennett's voice, low and steady, cut through the chaos. "Reverse green. Keep her straight. Hold it, hold." The aircraft yawed slightly left, then straightened. The nose dipped and lifted again as the hydraulic system fought the asymmetry. The brakes bit unevenly. A thin smell of burnt rubber filled the air. Then, at last, the speed bled away. The engines wound down into an exhausted hum. Silence, again deeper this time. Heavier, almost sacred. From the cockpit, Bennett's voice returned, calm but not casual. "Welcome to High Ridge International." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Emergency personnel will be approaching the aircraft shortly." Through the window, Naomi saw the flashing blue lights drawing closer. Fire trucks, ambulances, and the unmistakable vehicles of the UASD and AIB. The plane wasn't taxiing to a gate. Instead, It turned gently off the main runway and stopped on a remote stand, surrounded by motionless asphalt and waiting figures in reflective vests. The hum of the engines faded into quiet. The cabin lights brightened. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence carried too much truth for celebration. Madison Vale stared out her window, her reflection pale and still. Her phone lay forgotten on the tray table. Cassandra unbuckled her harness slowly, eyes lowered. The procedural certainty drained from her posture. Leo Park stood in the galley, wiping his palms on his uniform, eyes fixed on Naomi as if to confirm she was real. Naomi didn't move. Her pulse was steady, her face calm. But inside, her mind was cataloging everything: the delayed flap extension, the uneven drag signature, the data that would soon prove what she had known all along. She thought, this is how the truth lands, not with applause, but with gravity. Outside, the emergency team approached, their yellow vests bright under the floodlights. The cabin door opened to the cool evening air. Voices murmured, UASD officials confirming tail numbers, AIB inspectors requesting black box timestamps. Naomi watched as Captain Bennett stepped out of the cockpit. His uniform was immaculate despite the strain of the landing. He met her eyes across the cabin and gave a small nod, one professional acknowledging another. Then he spoke, his voice carrying through the hush. Dr. Cross, he said quietly, they'd like to speak with you first. Cassandra turned toward Naomi, disbelief flickering again. Your Naomi rose from her seat, adjusting her blazer. I told you who I was, she said simply. Cassandra's lips parted, but no sound followed. Madison lowered her gaze. The hierarchy that had once seemed so solid: rank, uniform, fame, had inverted completely. In the end, it wasn't the loudest or the highest who decided the fate of the flight. It was the woman they'd tried to silence. Naomi stepped into the aisle. The passengers turned to watch her pass, some in awe, others in quiet shame. She didn't look back. The open cabin door flooded her face with cold air and flashing light. For the first time since takeoff, she smiled a small, private smile that held no pride, only peace. It's not about proving them wrong, she thought. It's about making sure they live long enough to understand why. Outside, the night stretched vast and quiet over the tarmac. The plane stood still, engines cooling, metal ticking softly in the wind. Around it, the emergency vehicles waited not for tragedy, but for truth. And in that silence, heavy with relief and revelation, Naomi Cross, engineer, witness, and survivor of quiet injustice, walked down the stairs into the light. The night air at High Ridge International was cool and unnervingly still. The emergency lights painted the tarmac in long red and white streaks, flickering across the silver skin of the aircraft like the pulse of a living thing slowly calming after trauma. Steam hissed from the brakes, a whisper against the hum of idling rescue trucks. The plane stood alone on the remote stand, separated from the rest of the terminal by distance and by the weight of what almost happened. Inside, passengers sat in uneasy quiet as two figures in dark jackets boarded Miles Porter and Dana Shaw, both with UASD credentials clipped to their collars. They moved with that practiced efficiency of people accustomed to walking into crisis. Porter's voice was low and courteous. Dr. Naomi Cross. Naomi stood. Her posture was calm but grounded, her movements unhurried. Yes, I'm Agent Porter. This is Agent Shaw. We'd like to speak with you outside. Ma'am, Captain Bennett will accompany us shortly. Cassandra Blake's eyes flicked up from where she sat buckled in the jump seat. She didn't speak. Madison Vale pretended to scroll through her dark phone screen. No one else moved. Naomi gathered her bag and followed the agents down the narrow aisle. Each step toward the open door felt like walking through the layers of everything that had been said, doubted, and dismissed. The night met her with a wash of cool air. Floodlights glared across the concrete. Beyond the perimeter vehicles, maintenance techs in orange vests were already clustered under the right wing, their flashlights sweeping like fireflies across the metal. She could see it from a distance the way the slat hung slightly out of line, a subtle distortion that no passenger would ever notice, but any engineer would. Agent Shaw gestured toward the scene. "We've secured the aircraft. Maintenance is inspecting the right wing actuator assembly now. We understand you're familiar with this model." Naomi nodded. "I led the systems diagnostics team at Etheron when the Falcon 780's slat actuator program was certified." That sentence changed the temperature of the conversation. Porter looked at her differently now. Less like a passenger, more like a peer. "Then you'll know what we're looking at." They reached the inspection area. Technicians crouched beneath the wing, their gloves shining wet under the lights. One of them straightened, holding up a fractured metal piece sealed inside a clear evidence bag. "Found this wedge near the hinge," he said. "Looks like the actuator rod end. Sheared clean through." Naomi took a step closer. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold. The fracture was jagged, crystalline at the break. She could see traces of stress fatigue. "That's from actuator, 4412, she said softly. "Outboard slat. Starboard wing." The tech nodded grimly. "Hydraulic fluid everywhere. Seal blew right before touchdown. If they'd gone full flaps, this whole slat would have jammed asymmetrically." Agent Shaw looked at Naomi. Meaning, Naomi said, her voice calm but firm, "that the right wing would have generated less lift than the left. At low altitude. That's a rollover event. They'd have lost control within seconds." Porter exchanged a look with Shaw. "So you're saying Naomi met his eyes? If they hadn't diverted, everyone on this aircraft would have died before they reached final." The words hung there, cold and absolute. Around them, even the maintenance crew fell silent. The flashing lights seemed to slow, as if the entire tarmac were holding its breath. Captain Bennett approached, his uniform neat, but his face drawn. He had that look pilots get when they realize how close the line between control and catastrophe really is. "They confirmed it?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "Slat actuator fracture. System B pressure loss. You wouldn't have caught it on ECAM till it failed completely." Bennett exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Then I owe you more than I can say." Naomi gave a faint smile. "You owe me nothing, Captain. Just keep listening when your instruments don't match your instincts." Cassandra had come out of the cabin now, hesitant, her posture smaller than before. She stopped a few paces away, watching the investigation unfold. For the first time, she looked like someone stripped of the authority that once armored her. She caught Naomi's eye, opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Madison Vale lingered behind her, phone clutched tight but pointed downward. The bright light from the tarmac reflected on her face, washing away the filters of vanity. For the first time, she looked her age young, uncertain, suddenly aware of how little her followers could help her now. Naomi turned back to the agents. "You'll find the root cause upstream in maintenance logs. This kind of fracture doesn't happen overnight." Porter scribbled in his notepad. "We've already got AIB cross-referencing SkyLynx's maintenance chain. They said your message included a photo and acoustic analysis." Naomi nodded. "That was enough to trigger a Level 1 alert under Sentinel protocol." Sentinel Shaw asked. "It's a predictive diagnostic suite Etheron developed," Naomi said. It monitors telemetry signatures from structural actuators, compares them with baseline stress curves. It doesn't just react, it predicts failure before it happens. Bennett looked at her with quiet admiration. So you didn't just hear a noise. You recognized its frequency. Naomi gave a small shrug. Sometimes intuition is just experience that remembers its math. Shaw smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. A mechanic nearby shouted. Pressure bleed confirmed. We're sealing the line. She's safe. Naomi looked up at the wing again. The right slat caught the floodlight, gleaming pale silver under the stars. It was beautiful. Even wounded proof of how close human engineering could come to perfection, and how fragile that perfection always was. You don't shout at a system when it fails, she thought. You listen until it tells you where it broke. Porter extended his hand. Dr. Cross, the UASD and the passengers of Flight 904 owe you their lives tonight. That's not a figure of speech. Naomi shook his hand politely. I wasn't trying to be heroic. Agent Porter, I was just doing my job when I wasn't allowed to finish before takeoff. Behind them, Cassandra lowered her gaze. Madison turned away. The hum of the idling engines seemed to soften into something almost penitent. The agents moved off to coordinate statements, and Naomi stood alone for a moment beside the wing. She touched the cold metal surface lightly with her fingertips, tracing the thin rivet line where strength met vulnerability. One fracture, one assumption, one act of silence, that's all it takes, she thought. The difference between survival and tragedy is often just whether someone decides to speak anyway. A gust of wind rolled across the tarmac, carrying with it the faint sound of the emergency crews packing up. The flashing lights began to dim. The crisis was over. Naomi stepped back toward the stairway, her shadow long against the concrete. Behind her, the broken actuator sat in its clear evidence bag under the wing, a small, shining relic of the moment when truth refused to stay ignored. She glanced once more at the silent fuselage and whispered, almost to herself, 188 souls. Safe. Then she turned toward the terminal lights, her steps steady, her face calm. The night swallowed the sound of her heels, leaving behind only the low hum of engines cooling a quiet hymn to restraint, reason, and the woman who had saved them all without raising her voice. The morning after the incident, the conference room inside High Ridge's UASD field office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and aviation fuel. The long glass wall overlooked the hangar where Flight 904 sat immobilized, its right wing stripped open like a patient in post-surgery. Inside, Agent Miles Porter scrolled through maintenance logs while Dana Shaw took notes, her handwriting precise and compact. Captain Bennett sat at the far end of the table, still in uniform, his eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Naomi Cross sat opposite him, posture steady, hands folded loosely before her. On the screen behind them, a maintenance timeline glowed in sterile light. Falcon 780 tail N97 cell. Scheduled C check. Deferred 10:42 a.m. Signed T. Wallace remote authorization. Deferred, Porter asked quietly. Why would a mandatory inspection be deferred the same day of a high-profile flight? Dana looked up. Because the ground team was never there, she said, sliding a printed report across the table. They were reassigned to handle a VIP priority loadout. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. Who issued that reassignment? Porter tapped the next document on the tablet. Ground Control Supervisor Trent Wallace. He authorized the crew to assist at Gate 23 after a request came through from the cabin lead Cassandra Blake. Bennett shifted uncomfortably. His voice was low. Gate 23 was ours. Shaw nodded. Correct. The report says the VIP passenger required 12 pieces of luggage, a service dog, and specific media equipment clearance. The process delayed standard pre-flight maintenance checks by nearly 30 minutes. Porter turned another page, and since the flight was already running behind, Wallace logged the C-check as completed digitally, from his terminal, without anyone physically verifying the actuator assembly. Silence filled the room. Bennett rubbed his forehead. So the failure started long before we left the ground? Naomi spoke softly. No. The failure started when someone decided convenience mattered more than compliance. Porter leaned back in his chair. You're not wrong, Doctor. The pattern fits. One deferred check, one unsigned note, one unchecked slat, and a culture that says VIP means more than SOP. Dana looked toward Naomi. We cross-referenced the timestamp from your code-red submission with SkyLynx's dispatch record. You triggered the warning exactly 12 minutes before ECAM registered a pressure fault. Naomi's voice remained calm. That's consistent with Sentinel's prediction range. The fracture propagated gradually under hydraulic load. Bennett exhaled. And we never would have seen it coming. Outside, a fuel truck rumbled by. Through the glass, mechanics in white suits moved around the aircraft, their gestures slow and deliberate. The wing gleamed under the morning light, one slat panel missing a surgical void exposing wires and pistons. Porter rose, pacing near the window. You know what's funny, he said, tone dry but tired. In every incident like this, there's always a chain. Never one villain, never one hero, just people each thinking their shortcut won't matter. Dana nodded quietly. Until it does. Naomi's eyes followed the movement outside. It's the same in systems engineering, she said. A single miscalibrated variable can cascade through everything. The danger isn't the mistake itself. It's the assumption that the system will correct for it. Her reflection in the glass looked almost ghost-like, the faint morning light outlining her face. They always think systems are smarter than people, she thought. But people build them. People break them. A knock at the door broke the silence. An assistant entered, handing Shaw a tablet. Preliminary UASD audit. Ma'am. Shaw scanned it quickly. It's confirmed, she said. SkyLynx's internal message log shows that Cassandra Blake contacted ground operations at 10:17 a.m. with an urgent priority request for baggage assistance. Wallace's team was diverted at 10:20. The deferred inspection was marked completed at 10:42. Flight 904 pushed from gate at 10:58. Porter's jaw tightened. 40 minutes. That's how close they came to killing 188 people. Bennett looked up sharply. Don't say they. We all fly under the same badge. Naomi turned to him. Then make sure that badge still means something. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight, the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to make truth echo. Porter placed his hands on the table. We'll be filing a Level 2 negligence report against SkyLynx Airways. That includes Cassandra Blake, Trent Wallace, and any supervisory personnel who signed off remotely. UASD and AIB will issue joint findings, Dana added. We'll recommend mandatory implementation of Sentinel diagnostic integration across all Falcon 780 aircraft within 6 months. Bennett nodded slowly. If that system had been live fleet-wide, none of this would have happened. Naomi's expression didn't change. The system existed, she said. What was missing was respect for it. The line lingered, sharp and simple. Porter almost smiled sadly. Not with amusement, but with recognition. You ever thought of working for regulation? Dr. Cross. She shook her head. No, I build things. I don't govern them. But sometimes the only way to fix a system is to let it collapse under its own arrogance. Porter closed his folder. Consider this the sound of collapse beginning. Across the tarmac, the noise of tools and engines seemed distant, muffled by glass. Naomi watched as a technician held up the broken actuator rod in the sunlight. It gleamed briefly. catching a flash of brilliance before turning dull again. So small, she thought. So much depended on it. Cassandra was called in an hour later. Her face was pale, her uniform pressed but trembling at the sleeves. Madison followed, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, her silence heavy. Porter's tone with them was professional, not cruel. Facts didn't need anger to sting. "Ms. Blake," he said, "your request to prioritize the VIP loadout directly disrupted maintenance procedure. Did you confirm the deferred checklist yourself?" Cassandra hesitated. "No, it wasn't my department to. Yet you made the request that led to it." Her voice faltered. "I didn't know they'd skip safety for it. I just followed instruction." Porter didn't answer. He turned to Madison. "And you, Ms. Vale, you are the VIP in question." Madison swallowed. "Yes. Did you insist on filming on board, on bringing your pet without proper declaration?" She nodded faintly. "My manager said it was cleared. We were told everything was arranged." Naomi watched from her seat, saying nothing. There was no satisfaction in the unraveling, no triumph in being right. Just the slow revelation of how easily a system could trade caution for comfort. Porter's voice softened, almost weary. "You understand that everyone here is alive today because Dr. Cross ignored the hierarchy that protected you." Cassandra looked down. Madison blinked hard behind her glasses. Naomi stood. "You don't need to apologize," she said evenly. "Just remember the next time you decide who deserves a seat and who doesn't." No one spoke after that. By afternoon, UASD filed its preliminary summary. SkyLynx Airways faced suspension of its Falcon 780 fleet pending review. Trent Wallace was placed on leave. Cassandra's credentials were revoked. Madison's management team was contacted by insurers demanding restitution for the emergency diversion. Outside, the jet still sat in the sunlight, silent and incomplete, its wound exposed. Naomi walked past it on her way to the terminal, her reflection ghosting across the fuselage. Power never disappears, she thought. It just moves quietly from the ones who demand it to the ones who deserve it. And as she stepped into the bright, clean air of the concourse, the echo of the engines from the night before seemed to follow her, a reminder that sometimes the loudest sound of justice is the silence that comes after truth lands. By the time the morning broadcasts hit the air, the story had already escaped containment. Flight 904, engineer saves 188 lives after airline skips safety checks for influencer VIP. The headline spread faster than turbulence. Within hours, it was everywhere on TV tickers, talk radio, even the morning paper lying on kitchen counters across America. People read it while stirring their coffee and shook their heads the same way they did when the world reminded them how cheaply respect could be traded for status. Madison Vale watched it unfold from her apartment in downtown Los Angeles. She hadn't slept. The pale light of her phone screen illuminated a face that once earned sponsorships for skincare and self-help. Now, it reflected ruin. The live stream she had posted mid-flight, her breathless claims that Naomi Cross had attacked the crew and compromised the flight, had been dissected frame by frame. Fact-checkers froze the moment the phone fell, showing Madison's hand knocking Naomi's device aside. They slowed the clip, enhanced the audio, and laid the truth bare for millions. It wasn't Naomi causing chaos. It was Madison manufacturing it. Brands that once lined up to pay her for a smile issued terse statements before noon. Partnership with Mizos. Vale has been terminated, effective immediately. A day later, SkyLynx's insurer filed a civil action, $2.8 million in costs for diversion, inspection, and passenger compensation. When her legal team withdrew, the bankruptcy paperwork followed. The public sympathy she tried to summon collapsed under its own vanity. A video surfaced of her walking through the airport with 12 suitcases, berating staff for not knowing who she was. The service dog that sparked the crisis was later revealed to be uncertified, borrowed from a friend for a PR shoot. Her followers dropped overnight. So did the illusion. By week's end, the court ordered her to perform 200 hours of public service airport janitorial duty. Cameras followed her the first day, of course, until she begged them to stop. Fame doesn't like mirrors when the lighting turns honest. Cassandra Blake's fall came quieter, more brutal in its finality. The notice from SkyLynx was one-line-long employment terminated effective immediately. Her name was flagged in the UASD's registry. Her flight credentials revoked. In aviation, that was a kind of exile. She applied to smaller airlines, charter firms, even private security. Every background check came back the same: ineligible for rehire. Disciplinary misconduct related to safety negligence. Her polished smile, once her shield, no longer fit. The industry that once applauded her professionalism turned its back. There's a saying among flight crews: a plane remembers who touched it. The same could be said of reputations. She rented out her house to stay afloat and took temp work at a hospitality desk in a convention center. There, no one cared about her years in the sky. She handed out badges to tourists and executives who didn't look her in the eye. And every so often she'd hear an airplane passing overhead and flinch not from fear, but from memory. As for SkyLynx Airways, the storm didn't end with the landing. It started there. The UASD's interim report leaked to the press before the company could spin it. The words were dry, clinical, but devastating. Systemic procedural negligence prioritized customer prestige over operational integrity. The stock ticker reflected that Diagnosis brutally SLX fell 44% in a single trading day. By evening, financial networks showed grainy footage of the CEO walking into the corporate tower flanked by lawyers. The board met behind closed doors. When they emerged, the company released a short statement: leadership transition effective immediately. Inside the hangars, AIB inspectors began emergency checks on the entire Falcon 780 fleet. Planes that were supposed to fly were grounded indefinitely. Crews shuffled through airports with fatigue on their faces. Passengers canceled bookings. On the investor forums, retired pilots wrote long posts explaining why the system failed. The consensus wasn't about engineering. It was culture. When status outruns safety, gravity will remind you who's in charge. Naomi Cross read that line one evening while sitting alone in her small apartment in Seattle. She smiled faintly. She didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no joy in it, just a certain symmetry. Sometimes, she thought, justice isn't a hammer. It's gravity quiet, inevitable, unbending. The media requested interviews, of course. Morning shows wanted her on air. Documentaries offered her six-figure speaking deals. She declined them all. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. Symbols could be co-opted, simplified, sold. Instead, she returned to work. Etheron Dynamics assigned her to the Sentinel rollout team, now mandatory under the UASD's directive. When she entered the lab, engineers stood a little straighter. Some of them had seen the headlines. Others just knew. Captain Bennett sent her an email weeks later, a simple note that read, "You saved my crew. If you ever fly with me again, the first coffee's on me." She replied, "Only if the checklist's done first." Beyond that, she said little. The world did the talking. On social media, people debated what it all meant. Some saw it as proof that truth still had weight. Others turned it into noise. feeding it into the endless churn of outrage and forgetting. But for those who paid attention, there was something enduring about how it ended, not with fury, but with consequence. Naomi understood that. She'd spent her career studying systems hydraulic, electronic, human. She knew that the worst failures never began with explosions. They began with small choices: who gets believed, who gets ignored, who gets rushed, who gets spared the rules. Looking back, she could still see Cassandra's face when the order came down to divert. Madison's when the live stream backfired. The CEO's when the stock collapsed. Every expression was the same shock at discovering that power had limits. It always does, she thought. That's what keeps us safe. Outside her window, a plane rose into the dusk sky, its lights steady, its systems checked, its people hopefully reminded. Naomi watched it until it vanished into cloud, then closed her laptop and returned to her code. The story had ended, but the system she built would outlive them all. The newspapers chose the name before Naomi ever agreed to speak. The Angel of Flight 904. It appeared first in the Baltimore Chronicle, then spread to national syndication, rolling across breakfast tables and talk radio like a slow wave of rediscovered decency. The headline wasn't hers to claim, and she didn't try to. Still, the word settled into the public imagination, an image of calm intelligence triumphing over arrogance. A quiet woman saving a plane full of strangers without shouting, without vengeance. When reporters asked her for interviews, she declined the first dozen. She told Etheron's communications office that she didn't want her story turned into another round of morning show sentimentality. But they kept calling, and eventually the company convinced her to sit for just one profile. The interviewer was Edmund Clark, the retired professor who had once offered her his seat during the chaos. He'd written essays on ethics in aviation for decades, and when the story broke, the network reached out to him as both witness and philosopher. When the cameras rolled, Clark didn't play the part of the grateful survivor. He spoke with quiet conviction, his voice measured like an old radio broadcaster's. "I didn't know who she was," he said. "I just saw a young woman being treated unfairly and thought maybe giving up my seat would calm things down. What I didn't realize was that I was giving my seat to the only person on that plane who could save it." The clip went viral, not because of its drama, but because of its restraint. Older Americans recognized something in Clark's tone that reminded them of another era, one where heroes didn't announce themselves. Naomi, watching from her living room, sighed softly. She hadn't wanted that kind of fame, but she also knew that sometimes the story wasn't yours to keep. It belonged to the lesson it carried. Behind the headlines, the real work had already begun. At Etheron Dynamics, she led the technical review between UASD, AIB, and her own Sentinel Diagnostics division. For weeks, she worked 18-hour days, helping investigators trace the slat actuator fault, redesign predictive alerts, and integrate cross-platform diagnostics. Sentinel's upgrade, which once lingered in bureaucratic limbo, was now marked critical priority. The meeting rooms were full of people who, months earlier, might have doubted her. Now they took notes when she spoke. When she presented, no one interrupted. She didn't demand respect. It arrived quietly, almost by osmosis, born of competence that had proved itself under pressure. One afternoon, during a joint session between Etheron and the Aviation Bureau, Agent Miles Porter stopped by her lab. He carried a small plaque, one of those understated government commendations that never make headlines, for exceptional service and professional courage in ensuring the safety of Flight 904. Naomi looked at it for a long time before accepting. I didn't act out of courage. Agent Porter, I acted out of habit." He smiled faintly. That's what courage usually looks like. Later, Captain Bennett sent her a letter, handwritten in deliberate penmanship. It read, "You gave me the one thing every pilot prays for another chance to land right. My crew and I will carry that debt quietly, but forever." She kept it folded in her desk, under a stack of circuit diagrams and code printouts. The world moved fast after that. Sentinel was adopted by every major U.S. carrier within 6 months. Training manuals were rewritten, integrating its alert system into routine procedure. Naomi was asked to testify before the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Safety. She wore a gray suit, spoke softly, and avoided politics. "I'm not here to assign blame," she said. "I'm here to make sure systems and people learn to listen to noise, to warning signs, and to each other." Her testimony lasted 20 minutes. The applause afterward lasted longer. A month later, Etheron held a press event unveiling Sentinel 2.0. Naomi was invited to the stage, though she had no interest in speeches. She looked out over the rows of executives, reporters, and engineers and said simply, "It shouldn't take a near disaster for us to remember that integrity is a safety system, too." That line would later be quoted in aviation journals and business ethics seminars. She didn't mean it as poetry, it was just the truth. Plainly said. Some nights, when the noise quieted and the city fell still, Naomi would think back to that flight, the pressurized air, the white noise of the cabin, the heavy silence after Cassandra's threats. She could still hear the faint metallic whine from the wing. It came to her now like a ghostly echo, not of fear, but of instinct. She would remember Edmund Clark's kindness, Leo Park's nervous honesty, even Cassandra's trembling apology on the tarmac. Memory softened the edges of it all, though never enough to erase it. She didn't forgive easily, not because she held grudges, but because forgiveness, to her, wasn't a gesture. It was maintenance, a process, slow and deliberate, like tightening every bolt so the next flight wouldn't rattle loose. One weekend, Clark invited her to a small university lecture series he ran on ethics and the everyday. He introduced her as a woman who didn't just prevent tragedy, but modeled how to stay human while doing it. Afterward, students surrounded her, asking what it felt like to be a hero. Naomi smiled. "Mostly, it feels like paperwork and long nights," she said. "The rest is just luck and listening." When she left the auditorium, Clark walked her to the parking lot. The evening sky was low and gray, the kind that carried the smell of rain. "You know," he said, "there's something profoundly American about your story." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean it's the idea that decency doesn't make headlines until it has to?" he said. "But when it does, it reminds people of who they wanted to be." She didn't answer. She just nodded, quietly touched by the simplicity of it. That night, she drove home through light rain, the rhythmic wipers keeping time with her thoughts. In her rearview mirror, a jet passed overhead, its lights cutting through cloud. She followed it with her eyes until it vanished into the distance. Every flight is a promise, she thought, and every promise deserves someone who keeps it. When she reached her apartment, she placed the commendation plaque next to the letter from Captain Bennett. It wasn't a shrine, just a small reminder of why she did what she did. Then she went back to her workbench, opened a new schematic, and began sketching ideas for Sentinel's next iteration, an algorithm that could detect human fatigue patterns in pre-flight maintenance logs. Quietly, methodically. She kept building. Some heroes retire into speeches and ceremonies. Naomi built systems that outlasted applause. The headlines faded eventually, as all headlines do. But in the years that followed, when a flight crew somewhere caught a mechanical fault before takeoff, saving hundreds of lives without anyone knowing, the Sentinel alert light would flash on a small display, and though no one would say her name aloud, every time that light came on, it whispered the story again in silence, in safety, in the calm intelligence of a woman who once refused to give up her seat. 6 months after Flight 904, SkyLynx Airways had new leadership, new colors on its tail, and a new conscience stitched quietly into its operations. The new CEO, Evelyn Hart, came from the maintenance division, not marketing. Her first address to employees wasn't about quarterly targets or customer satisfaction. It was about humility. Safety above status, she said into the cameras, her tone calm, deliberate, and unpolished in a way that made people listen. That's not a slogan. It's a confession. We forgot who keeps the sky honest. The engineers, the crews, the people who still believe that rules aren't obstacles. They're promises. The phrase caught on. It was printed on flight manuals, maintenance hangars, even embroidered into the collars of new uniforms. It wasn't branding. It was penance. Her first act as CEO was to announce a $5 million endowment to Harrington University, funding a research center in Naomi Cross's name, the Sentinel Systems Laboratory, the goal to develop predictive diagnostics and ethical frameworks for next-generation aviation safety. When journalists asked why, Hart answered simply, "Because our company was saved by a woman we didn't listen to." Naomi didn't attend the press conference. She was working as usual in Etheron's West Lab, debugging a new neural simulation for hydraulic stress patterns. But the invitation reached her desk later that week. Along with it came a letter and a small box. The letter was handwritten, rare in corporate circles, Dr. Cross, on behalf of every employee, crew member, and passenger whose lives continue safely because of your integrity. SkyLynx extends this gesture not as compensation, but gratitude. Enclosed is your lifetime first-class pass. Use it however you wish, though we know you'll likely sit in the window seat and keep listening to the engines. Naomi smiled when she read that. She opened the box. Inside, a black titanium card with her name etched in silver. It caught the light when she tilted it, understated. Beautiful. Practical. Much like her, she didn't think of herself as a celebrity, but slowly, her influence rippled outward, not through speeches or spotlights, but through procedures and habits. Under Hart's direction, SkyLynx launched a new internal initiative called the Cross Protocol. It replaced the old Cole Protocol, named years earlier after a pilot who had survived an electrical fire. This time, the name honored not survival, but foresight. The Cross Protocol was simple mandatory simulation and ethics training for all pilots, flight attendants, and maintenance engineers. Every 6 months, employees would face scenarios that blurred the line between authority and safety, learning when to question, when to escalate, when to listen. At the first rollout session, Captain Daniel Archer, SkyLynx's new director of flight training, stood before a group of trainees in Denver. The man was in his early 50s, a former test pilot with the composure of someone who'd seen his share of storms. He began without notes. "In this job, we like to think there's a chain of command," he said. "But when the chain breaks, someone has to hold the line. What Dr. Naomi Cross taught us is simple. There are no VIPs in an emergency. There are only humans and the rules that keep them alive." The room was silent. The trainees nodded, some out of duty, some out of awe. Across the company, similar sessions unfolded, ground crews reviewing the actuator that failed on Flight 904. flight attendants practicing conflict de-escalation scripts that prioritize safety over social pressure, dispatchers trained to cross-verify VIP requests against maintenance requirements. For the first time in years, SkyLynx was building something invisible: trust. Naomi watched it all from a distance. She wasn't part of the airline anymore, but she received the reports. She read the memos. She noticed the subtle shifts in tone. Memos that once began with brand integrity now began with operational ethics. When Etheron Dynamics and UASD jointly certified Sentinel as an international standard, she attended the ceremony quietly, sitting in the back row. There were dignitaries, journalists, and executives shaking hands. But Naomi paid attention only to the small details: the engineers in the audience wearing faded badges, the maintenance foreman who stood straighter when the Sentinel logo appeared on screen. Afterward, Evelyn Hart found her among the crowd. "You built the system," Hart said. "We just learned to listen to it." Naomi smiled politely. "Listening's the hardest part. Machines warn us all the time. We just get good at ignoring them." Hart nodded. Maybe the same could be said about people. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel from the nearby runway. A plane lifted off, cutting through the clouds. Naomi watched it until it disappeared. "Every takeoff is a promise," she said quietly. "I'm just glad we're finally keeping it." Later, as she drove back to Seattle, she thought about what legacy really meant. People like to use the word when something dramatic happened: a speech, a medal, a monument. But to her, legacy wasn't loud. It was the quiet persistence of better habits, the invisible calibration of a system that once failed, but now held steady. She thought of the night she'd been told to move from her seat, of the contempt in Cassandra's voice, of Madison's smirk. Then she thought of the silence on that flight when the announcement came, when every person on board, whether rich or ordinary, had realized that the woman they'd dismissed was the reason they were alive. It wasn't revenge that satisfied her. It was restoration, watching the same hierarchy that once humiliated her rebuild itself with her principles embedded in its frame. Weeks later, she flew again. Same airline, different feeling. She sat in her usual window seat, 2B, sipping tea while reading telemetry data on her tablet. A young flight attendant, new to the job, recognized her and whispered something to a colleague. A few minutes later, the captain made a brief announcement before takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard SkyLynx Flight 212 to Capitol View. Our safety briefing today is dedicated to Dr. Naomi Cross, the mind behind the Sentinel system, keeping this aircraft safe. Thank you, Dr. Cross, wherever you are, for reminding us that knowledge is the truest form of calm." The cabin applauded softly. Naomi didn't turn around. She just smiled to herself, watching the clouds drift by as the engines roared. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax, not because the world was fixed, but because it was learning. Outside, the plane climbed through a curtain of white. Inside, Naomi closed her eyes, listening, always listening for the steady hum of a machine that now, finally, kept its promises. The hum of the new SkyLynx 787 was different, cleaner, softer, almost reverent. Every sound in the cabin carried a sense of redemption, as if even the air itself remembered. Naomi sat in seat 1A, the wide leather chair near the nose of the aircraft. She didn't ask for it. The airline had made it permanent. Her name, discreetly engraved on a small plaque beside the window, read, "Reserved for Dr. Naomi Cross, Sentinel Visionary." The flight attendant serving the forward cabin was an older woman named Carmen Ellis, 30 years in the industry, silver streaks in her hair, dignity in her posture. She set a cup of tea on Naomi's table and smiled warmly. "You're Dr. Cross, aren't you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Naomi looked up, her tone as measured as her movements. "I suppose I still am." Carmen hesitated, then said softly, "I was in the second crew to train under the Cross Protocol. It changed the way we work, changed the way we listen. Thank you for giving us something worth believing in again." Naomi nodded once, humbled. "Protocols don't save people. Carmen, people do. They just need permission to care." The attendant smiled again, her eyes glistening. "Then I guess you gave us that permission." When Carmen left, Naomi turned toward the window. Clouds rolled like soft hills beneath them. The reflection of her face merged with the sky, a woman and her creation, both shaped by pressure, both calm at altitude, below, somewhere far from this peaceful cabin. The world still moved on with its usual noise. A tabloid headline scrolled across airport newsstands that morning. Former influencer Madison Vale spotted cleaning terminal bathrooms at Sable City International. The photo showed a woman in a reflective vest, hair tied back, pushing a mop beside a gate marked Granite Hall. She wasn't smiling this time. No lights, no filters, just the quiet symmetry of consequence. In another part of the country, Cassandra Blake sat in a recruitment lobby, one of 6 applicants waiting for a gate management job. Her resume was perfect, her posture immaculate, but the interviewer's smile faded the moment they reached the background check. The system flagged her old record termination under safety breach. She left the building before the decision even came. Outside, airplanes crossed the sky in perfect rhythm. She looked up at one for a long time, as if waiting for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. Neither came. The industry had moved on, built atop the wreckage she helped expose. At Harrington University, the Sentinel Systems Laboratory had become a crown jewel of engineering ethics. Inside, rows of students studied predictive diagnostics, learning to interpret the language of machines before they cried for help. On the wall above the entrance, etched in brushed steel, a quote read, "Listen to warnings. Prioritize safety. Dr. Naomi Cross." The words weren't poetic, but every aspiring engineer who walked under them understood their weight. A small display case in the lab's lobby held a single object, the fractured actuator pin from Flight 904. The same piece that almost tore a jet from the sky. It sat suspended in clear acrylic, lit from below, glowing like an artifact of quiet truth. Every year, visiting dignitaries would pause before it in silence, not in worship, but in recognition that progress is not made of grand declarations, but of moments when someone refuses to stay silent about what matters. Beyond aviation, Sentinel had found its way into other frontiers. The Orion Space Agency OSO announced that its pre-launch systems had integrated the Cross Protocol for all missions. The press release quoted OSA's director, Captain Daniel Archer, who had once trained under Naomi's ethics model at SkyLynx. "Space doesn't forgive arrogance," Archer told reporters. "The Cross Protocol reminds us that even silence can be a warning, and every warning deserves a listener." The phrase became a quiet mantra across launch pads and control rooms, murmured before countdowns began. Listen first, launch later. Meanwhile, at Etheron Dynamics, Naomi's office overlooked Puget Sound glass, steel, and the low hum of servers processing Sentinel data from thousands of flights. She was now vice president of global safety systems, but her desk was remarkably uncluttered. One monitor, one notebook, and a single acrylic block resting at the corner. Inside that block, the same broken actuator rod, a relic of failure, turned into her compass. Sometimes, when the office emptied and the city outside blurred into evening light, she would glance at it and remember the sound, the faint metallic whine before the thud, the warning no one else had heard. She didn't keep it as a trophy. She kept it as a reminder that every system, no matter how advanced, still depends on a human being who refuses to ignore what they know is wrong. Visitors often asked about it. She never gave long explanations. "That's the sound of learning," she would say quietly. Under her leadership, Sentinel evolved again version 2.0 Deep Space Diagnostics. It used AI to detect early stress signatures not just in aircraft, but in spacecraft and planetary vehicles. The technology extended her legacy beyond the atmosphere, ensuring that the principles of vigilance and humility would outlive even gravity's reach. She didn't travel often anymore, but every few months she flew the same route Sable City to Capitol View. SkyLynx Flight 904, now renumbered Flight 01 in quiet homage. The airline never advertised the connection, but the crews knew. They called it the flight that listens. On one such evening, as the engines droned softly, Naomi sipped her tea and glanced around the cabin. Everything about it, the lighting, the way the attendants moved, the quiet confidence of the passengers felt different from that day years ago. She realized something then: justice, when it's real, doesn't roar. It resonates. It leaves echoes in systems, habits, and people long after the shouting stops. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'd like to thank Dr. Naomi Cross, whose work continues to make every one of our flights safer. On behalf of all of us at SkyLynx, we're honored to have her on board." The cabin applauded softly. Naomi didn't turn around. She never did. Outside, the horizon opened a thin golden line dividing night from day. She rested her hand on the acrylic block beside her, feeling the faint vibration of the aircraft beneath her palm. Listen to warnings, she thought. Prioritize safety. Simple words, hard-earned truths. And as the plane rose higher into the fading light, it carried with it the quiet hum of a world, rebuilt one where dignity had become policy, and silence had learned to speak. Thank you so much for watching today's story. This wasn't just a story about a flight. It was a journey about dignity, wisdom, and the quiet awakening of justice. We witnessed how one woman dismissed, underestimated, even humiliated changed an entire system, not through anger or revenge, but through calm intelligence and unshakable integrity. If this story touched you, remember there's a little bit of Naomi Cross in each of us, the part that listens before judging, that stays composed when others lose control, that believes justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. That kind of strength is what truly keeps the world upright. We hope this video didn't just move you. We hope it made you think. If you believe that values like wisdom, character, and respect for others deserve to be shared, please hit the like button and share this story with someone who might need to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, stories about ethics, awareness, and ordinary people who restore justice in extraordinary ways. Thank you for staying with us, for listening, and for believing that sometimes, when we stand still in truth, the world finally hears us. Like, share, and subscribe to keep spreading what's right, what's human, and what matters.